I hope you enjoy my stories. Instead of just clicking thumbs down, please comment and share how we can do better. If you do like our video, then please like and subscribe.
Jon Likes Magic. The stage wasn't large enough to accommodate all the equipment that was going to be used in the show. Instead, other pieces were being stored in the next room behind the curtain. The crew was assembling various apparatuses on the stage as Jon stood impatiently in the wings. A very large semicircular curtain obstructed the view of the crowd in the bar. Moving to a separation in a curtain, Jon slid through to stand on the edge of the stage. He looked down to the crowd to see if his guests had arrived yet. Front and center as planned, Ronnie and Donnie had taken their assigned spot. Ronnie wiggled incessantly in his chair, waiting for the show to begin. Jon smiled in their direction and nodded his head. Dressed in a new t-shirt and blue jeans, Ronnie was the first to notice Jon on the stage and started poking his brother and said, "See, he's a real magician. He has a cape and everything." "How long before the show starts, Donnie? Are we going to eat soon?" "I'm hungry. I didn't eat anything all day because I was waiting for you to get home, so we could come here." Without waiting for an answer from his brother, Ronnie stood up and started waving energetically at Jon to get his attention. Jon, we're here. Sit down, Ronnie. You promised you'd be good. You promised that you would sit still. Do you remember that promise?" Donnie said quietly. Ronnie reluctantly regained his seat. He looked over at Donnie and beamed a smile. "He is going to be the best. I know it because he has a cape." Jon looked down at Ronnie and held a single finger to his lips and then disappeared behind the curtain. Donnie waved over the waitress to order food and more drinks. Final preparations are underway behind the curtain as Jon impatiently ordered people about. His star assistant Belinda, now a gorgeous brunette, in truth an android, the same as all the other personnel behind the curtain. Belinda was scolding Jon. "I really should be watching the monitors and not be here because..." Jon cut her off. "Nonsense, my dear. All will be well. You worry too much." She reluctantly stood beside him, behind the long translucent table as the curtains went up. "Welcome, my friends, to my small magic show. I would like to point out from the very start that every trick that you are about to see is purely an illusion. Some of my tricks may be even frightening to you, but do not be alarmed. Nothing you see will be real. I would like to start out with a simple card trick. You there, the man in the second row, could you please come up on stage?" An older gentleman, assuming it was him that was being pointed out, stood up and made his way to the stage. He ascended the 2 stairs necessary to attain the platform and walked over and stood in front of Jon. "Now, sir, before you see 4 decks of unopened cards. I want you to choose just one." The older gentleman removed his glasses from his pocket and proceeded to scrutinize the unopened decks of cards. After several moments, he finally decided upon one and pointed it out. "Okay, sir, that's the deck you want, so that's the deck you'll get. I will not touch the decks of cards, and I want you to pick this one up and bring it to the front row of the audience. Oh, and by the way, before I forget to ask, what is your name, good sir?" "Thomas, but most people just call me Tom," he said in a slightly scratchy voice. Thomas picked up the deck of cards and made his way to the front row of the audience, then turned and faced the stage. "Okay, Thomas, what I want you to do is open up the deck of cards and have the first 5 people in the front row inspect and shuffle the cards." Complying with the request, Thomas opened up the new deck of cards and removed the cards from the packaging. He then passed the entire deck to the first person closest to him. Each of the 5 people in turn looked over the cards and shuffled them extensively. "Okay, Thomas, if you'll take the cards back from the last person, I'll explain the next step." Retrieving the cards, Thomas stood proudly, clutching the cards between both hands. "Thomas, I want you to select one card from the deck cards and then pass the rest of the deck to the first person on your left." He selected a card randomly from the deck and then passed the rest of the cards to the other person. "I have made my selection," he announced. "Okay, for the other 5 you've all inspected the deck of cards and there's nothing unusual about it. Would you agree with that? Just a standard deck of cards?" All 5 nodded in agreement, and some made the same remark out loud. "Okay, Thomas, the cards you are holding in your hand is the 5 diamonds. Can you verify that?" Thomas held up the single card for everyone to see. It indeed was the 5 diamonds. Jon looked over at the man holding the rest of the cards. "Okay, you sir, the one, yes, that is holding the rest of the deck of cards. Before you look at the cards again, you've already checked them once and said it was a perfectly ordinary deck of cards. I want you to look at the cards again, and you will find that every single card is at the moment the 5 diamonds." A man carefully turned the cards over and spread them out in his hands. He looked down amazed. All were the 5 diamonds. "Okay, you 2 can now take your seats. All in all, Not an entirely extravagant illusion, but we do have bigger things to come. Jon announced, for my next trick, once again a simple illusion, I will make my assistant float in the air. Now pay attention, my beautiful assistant here. We'll get underway. As you can notice from her costume, there are no real places to hide any gadgets, and any wires would be clearly visible. Now, of course, I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it. We're going to need another volunteer from the audience. With that said, Jon carefully scanned the audience and settled his attention on a rather large, plump woman. He pointed at her and got her attention. You, ma'am, would you please come up onto the stage? He said, extending his hand in her direction. She shyly giggled, and her friend at the table helped her to get up and going towards the stage. It seemed to be a major event for her to navigate the stairs, but she accomplished that and now stood beside Jon. Ma'am, could you please tell us your name? My name is Belinda. Must be a fairly common name. One of my assistants' name is also Belinda. But I do not believe we have met before. Have we met before, Belinda? No, sir. This is my first time here. Well, there's my first magic show, so that would make us even, Jon quipped. Jon looked her up and down and then said, I would like you to check my assistant and make sure that she has no wires, attachments, gizmos and gadgets or anything else concealed under her rather skimpy costume. Will you do that, Belinda? Belinda nodded and went to look over the assistant. She carefully peered in and around and waved her hands above the assistant head. Satisfied that nothing was amiss, she went back to stand beside Jon. There are no wires or anything that I can see, she stated as a fact. Okay, Belinda, I would like you to stand right where you are so that you can make sure that there are no wires or other gadgets being used, Jon said, directing his attention to Belinda. He stood next to his assistant and pulled a small magic wand from an inside pocket of his sparkling, sequined blue suit. He pointed and waved the wand at the assistant, making circular motions with it. She began to rise from the ground. She hovered soundlessly, absolutely vertical and motionless with her arms tight to her sides. Jon adjusted his wand, and she floated to a horizontal plane position. He looked over at the lady on the stage and grinned wildly. Okay, ma'am, excuse me, Belinda. There is a large hoop next to the table there, he said, pointing with his other hand. I would like you to pick that up and see if you can pass it over my assistant here. Start at her head and move the hoop towards her feet. Belinda excitedly moved to grab the hoop. She held the large circular tubing with two hands and walked short distance to where the assistant hung in the air. She placed the hoop next to the head and slowly started moving the hoop down the length of the body. Suddenly, she gasped. She hadn't noticed that she also was being lifted into the air. It wasn't quite a scream, but a sound was produced. Jon laughed out loud, turned addressing the crowd. There you go, folks, 2 Belindas for the price of 1. The crowd had exploded in applause. Belinda yelled, I want down. I'm afraid, please put me down. Nothing to worry about, my dear. You be safely back on terra firma momentarily. And with that, Jon made exaggerated motions with his wand, returning both his assistant and Belinda back to the ground. Belinda quivered slightly, not really sure if she was just excited or still afraid. Jon thanked her by saying, You are the very best helper I've had in a long time. Thank you, Belinda. And you can regain your seat now. Making it away back to the edge of the stage, Belinda looking backwards, expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Several more card tricks and simple illusions were performed, Jon moving seamlessly from one illusion to the next. Finally, he was ready to perform his 3 best illusions. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, for my next illusion, I will need another volunteer. Please note that there is nothing to be afraid of, and this is just magic. Jon scanned the audience once again and settled his gaze on one woman whom he noticed to be complaining to her partner throughout most of the entire show. Her man didn't look too happy and seemed to be avoiding most of the conversation from her. You there, about the 3rd table back? Yes. You, ma'am, could you please come up onto stage? Jon asked in his smooth voice. She didn't really look like you wanted to get up and remained riveted in her seat. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, let's give her a little encouragement, Jon said, egging on the crowd. The crowd started to cheer and making sounds that sounded like, get up, get on the stage. She relented finally and leaned over towards her husband and said something quietly in his ear. He seemed about to say something back, but she turned her back on him and walked up onto the stage, easily making the few stairs. What is your name, ma'am? Jon asked. Well, my name is Joan. Did you just want my first name? Yes, Joan, your first name will be fine. And if you'll just stand there for a moment, I will explain the illusion to the audience. Ladies in government, you have possibly seen other magicians that can make things disappear, say from one box to the next. They use curtains, etc. to mask what they're doing. I'm not going to use curtains, boxes, or anything else that will obstruct your view. I'm going to make this young lady disappear, right in front of your eyes." Joan stood there just looking bored and out of place. She looked at the crowd, staring at her with disregard. "Okay, Joan, I want you to stand exactly where you are. Do not move, and within a few seconds, you will be gone. Remember, don't panic. Panicking will only make things worse." Closing his eyes, Jon started making sounds that seemed to involve syllables and words that didn't exist. He lifted his wand and then hesitated. He looked at the crowd one more time. "Okay, everyone, I need you all to pay very close attention. Don't blink, or you might miss it." Jon tossed his wand in the air. When it hit the ground, Joan was gone. No smoke, no mirrors, just gone. A thunderous applause was heard throughout the entire bar. Jon bowed repeatedly. Thank you very much," he said. The cheering finally subsided and seemed to quiet down a little bit. Jon took the opportunity to address them once again. "Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. For my next trick, I would like to do something visually more radical. Something outstanding, confusing, and perhaps a little scary." Joan's husband stood up and looked all over the stage and turned around to see if his wife was somewhere else. He seemed very confused. From his vantage point on the stage, Jon noticed him right away. "Sir, you seem to have lost something. Is there anything that you would need my help in finding?" Jon said loudly, getting his attention. In a small, quiet voice, he asked, My wife, where? Where is she?" "Come now, sir, aren't you happier without her? She seemed to be a bit of a nag," Jon said jovially. But she's my wife, and I want her back." I thought I explained the illusion to everyone. I simply said I would make her disappear. I never said anything about bringing her back. I'm not sure if I know how to do that," Jon said, laughing. "But you have to bring her back. Who will take care of the kids?" "Okay, sir, I'll see what I can do, but I will not make any promises because I'm not really sure if I can get her back." Looking like he went into a trance, Jon started to mumble and vibrate slightly. His words were from a language that nobody ever heard. He brought his magic wand back up, that he had retrieved earlier, and spun it counterclockwise. Letting go of the wand, it continued to spin in the air of its own volition and suddenly explode with a blinding red flash. Joan reappeared on the stage, in the exact spot she was before, except she seemed to be visibly shaken by her ordeal and was sweating profusely as if she'd been running for her life. She sprang from the stage and grabbed a hold of her husband, trying to get him to leave the bar. He complied, and they both hurried towards an exit. The crowd laughed and cheered and applauded wildly, now completely stoked up for Jon's next illusion. Watching the couple leave, Jon laughed quietly to himself and then steadied himself for a very quick illusion. I'm assuming that a good portion of our crowd here tonight likes cats. This should be a very quick illusion, so remember not to blink. Out of magic wands, Jon removed his top hat and passed his hand over it several times, mumbling incantations with a dark, foreboding sound. He reached into the hat and pulled out a very small kitten. He stroked the kitten's hat a few times and listened to it purr. He tossed it lightly into the air, towards the first set of tables. As it gained altitude, it also gained in size, getting larger and larger. It became a full-grown Siberian tiger, snarling in a vicious way. It was fast approaching the crowd, and it almost arrived at the first table. Suddenly it became confetti, floating in the air, down on the first few sets of tables. The look of absolute terror in the people's eyes closest to the tiger delighted Jon to no end, and he proceeded to dance around the stage. The crowd clapped, showing appreciation for the trick. However, not as wildly as before. Jon just assumed that he had scared a few, more than what was intended. For my final trick, this evening, I will require another volunteer from the audience. Now I will explain the trick first and then get a volunteer. We have all seen magicians that have sawn someone in half. Generally, they have a big saw. We have one of those, and a couple boxes. We have none of those. They then proceed to saw the person in half, separating both boxes. It is truly a nice illusion. Ours will be done slightly differently. We have no boxes or structures except for a small table and a saw. Now, I would like a show of hands on who would like to be my volunteer. A few hands in the crowd went up, and Jon looked at all the willing volunteers. His eyes happened upon one woman to be used as his guinea pig. He pointed in her general direction in the attempt to solicit her attention. The woman made gestures of pointing at herself and standing up. Jon nodded and smiled and waved her come onto the stage. When she was comfortably standing in front of him, he asked her name and the response was Muriel. Muriel, are you ready for this? Oh yes, I love magic, she replied. Okay then, my assistant will bring you over the table and place you on it. You will be strapped into place. Is that acceptable? Oh yes, that will be just fine. Belinda maneuvered the frail-looking woman over to the small table and got her comfortably reclined on it. She proceeded to do up the heavy straps that would keep her in position throughout the entire event. She looked down at her and whispered into her ear, "It'll be fine. It's just an illusion and there is nothing to worry about. You're absolutely safe. You have my word." Muriel just nodded back with your compliance. A couple of men dressed in stage uniforms brought the saw out and set it up. Two others were moving out a large plastic shield. Within a few minutes, everything was ready to go. Jon had been standing waiting impatiently for everything to be finally set up. He looked at the crowd and removed his cape, handing it to Belinda. She took his large red cape and draped it over the large table. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular illusion is not for the faint of heart. I must warn you that various elements will be extremely graphic. He walked casually over to where Muriel was strapped to the table. First, what I must do is put my volunteer into a trance. He waved his hands mystically over Muriel's forehead and her eyes obediently closed. She could be heard to be softly snoring. Jon motioned at a few of the stagehands to prepare the saw. Ladies and gentlemen, no doubt you have noticed this large plastic shield. This shield is only here in the unlikely event that something drastically goes wrong. Now bear in mind once again that this is merely an illusion. If you hear screams or think that the trick has gone horribly bad, it probably hasn't. Be patient and be prepared to be amazed. Stepping over to a small control panel, Jon activated the saw. He slowly and deliberately lowered the saw. The saw inched downwards. Macabre background music filled the bar. The lights started oscillating from red to green to blue. Mere inches. For Muriel, she lay oblivious to her intended fate. Jon got a maniacal look in his face, accented by the rotating lights. He laughed an evil laugh, loudly. The saw made contact with the victim, and she screamed a blood-curdling screech. Frank over behind the bar rushed for the stage. The plastic shield exploded with blood as a saw cut into the raw flesh. Jon laughed harder and louder. The audience shrieked and panicked. Without warning, the saw shot back up into its regular position and stopped spinning. Jon took that moment to gawk at the crowd as the lights suddenly flooded the room. He stood back from his handiwork and simply bowed. At that moment, Frank arrived at the edge of the stage, perhaps moments too late. The look of fear on Frank's face told the story. He yelled up onto the stage, "Have you gone insane?" "Insane? No, Frank, I don't believe I am insane at all. However, that is merely my opinion. Perhaps we should ask Muriel what she thinks about my little trick," Jon said as he motioned Belinda to undo Muriel's straps. Walking over to the lifeless corpse of what appeared to be Muriel, Jon waved his hands and mumbled a few incantations to break her trance. She opened her eyes and smiled and asked, "What did I miss?" Jon helped her from the small table as the crew removed the grotesque dripping plastic shield. He stood in the center stage with Muriel and had her take a bow with him. The crowd was helpless, not sure whether to clap or run, but finally decided that it was a rather excellent trick in the laughter, and the applause became infectious. Frank, still perturbed by the show, looked at Jon and said, "Never again. This is the last time you do a magic show here, Jon." "No problems at all, Frank. I only needed one." Storming off in a huff, Frank left the stage area and headed back towards the bar. Jon reoriented himself to the center of the stage and began his wrap-up for the evening. "Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed our little show, and I will bring fond memories for you in the years to come. Good night and have a safe evening." The curtain descended down to close off the stage. The crew furiously began to move everything and clear the entire area. Jon whispered a few things to Belinda and sent her backstage change into a more prudish costume. Ronnie sat at his table, wide-eyed. He hadn't touched his beer since the show began. He took a small sip and grinned at his brother. "I told you it would be great art. You glad we came? He is a really good magician. We should have him for my birthday." Ronnie rambled on. Donnie was just in shock. He had thought for sure the tiger was going to land on the table. Then the last trick, he thought and shuddered. Jon made his way over to the table where the boys were sitting. He casually sat down in an empty chair and beamed them both a smile. "Did you like show, Ronnie?" Jon asked. "Oh, yes. It was great, and your cape just flowed behind you everywhere you went." "Well, Ronnie, I have even more exciting news for you. That is, if your brother agrees. How would you like a job?
Working with me.
You want me to be magician's helper? Not exactly, Ronnie, but I do need a helper, and I know you have a very good memory. What the job would be to get coffees, snacks, and occasional lunches for the work crew and myself, while working on the project next door. As well, I think I can teach you a few simple magic tricks. What do you think of that, Ronnie?
I can do that. I bring Donnie coffee all the time when we were at home.
Sometimes I even make him a sandwich. That leaves it up to you, Donnie. We will take very good care of him and broaden his experiences to more than just a TV. Would you agree with that? Not really sure of which way to proceed, Donnie sat there appearing to think it over. He looked at his brother and could see how happy this might make him. He looked at Jon, and all he could see was a good-natured person ready to help. Well, if he becomes a problem, you will have to let me know, as well I don't know how reliable he will be. If you put up at all that, then I say it's okay. Ronnie leapt from his chair and assailed his brother with a hug, knocking them right out of his chair and laughing as they hit the floor. Okay, Ronnie, meet me here at 9 a.m. and we will begin, Jon said in a fatherly voice.